Hey guys, Zach Hitzman here, coming at you with something a little different before today's video. Down in the link below, I have a couple of my raw files of some photos I've taken recently, and I want to see what you guys can do with them. Anyway, let me show you how I edited one of those photos. First thing I like to do with any image is simply just resize it, crop it down, and make sure everything's looking straight. So if you press R while you're in Lightroom, it'll bring you into the menu here. You can use that little angle tool, draw a line right across the horizon to make sure everything's level. Although with this image, it wasn't really looking like everything was level that way, so I just kind of did it manually and eyeballed it. Also, I'm using a 4:5 aspect ratio, which is best for Instagram if that's your sort of thing. Once I got the image straightened up, I decided to come on over and started playing around with some of the basics and the curves. No right or wrong way really to do this, just kind of start playing around with what looks best. I like to usually drop the highlights, especially in some of these images where it looks a little more overexposed. Although this was a pretty overcast day, so I'm not going to drop them down all the way. Also, if you hold Option while you're sliding some of the options back and forth, like highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, you can see where it starts to clip, whether it starts to get too dark or it starts to get too bright. And with the tone curve, you can see that there's not a lot of pixels sitting over in that bright region, so I brought that in a little bit to increase the dynamic range of the image a little bit, so I was using all the whites and all the darks. Next thing to do is to do some color grading in the color tab. For me, I like to drop the blues, especially because the gray on this card just always soaks up so much of the blue sky. Anything past that is just personal preference, really. I like to give things a little more of a less saturated look. Playing with the luminance can also help a lot to change the overall just feel of the image, just because you're making one color much brighter or much darker. Another thing to keep in mind in a lot of these car photos, there's a lot of aqua in the front windshield, which if you drag the hue up to more of that purple color and then bring down the saturation and luminance, you kind of help to darken that, make it look a little more tinted. Next thing I went to do was the vignetting. I always like to drag the amount down all the way and then decrease that feather a little bit. That way I can kind of see where the vignetting is sitting on the image. From this point, I like to play around with the midpoint, all the different adjustings until I get it right. I usually like just a little bit coming in around the edge, just give it a little more of that closed in, kind of focusing on the subject sort of feel. After I was done with the vignetting, I decided to add some of these linear gradients on the top and bottom of the image. On the bottom of the image, a lot of times because of pavements, at the bottom of my image when taking these photos of cars, I like to increase the clarity and dehaze it, and then playing around with all the other tabs just as I see fit. Since I'm planning on changing the background in this image, when I was adjusting the gradient at the top of the image, I was decreasing the dehaze to give it more of a fog look, introduce some more fog, which is what's going to happen in Photoshop. We're going to add even more fog. You can see the before and after, how the image is looking much better in terms of light, color, and just everything really. And then once you're happy, go ahead and right click and click edit in Photoshop. First thing I always like to do in Photoshop is give myself a backup and reference layer. So I'm going to name one layer Lightroom LR and one layer Photoshop PS. I'm going to kind of fly through this a little bit, but a lot of here what I'm doing is just selecting little inconsistencies in the bodywork, kind of like this reflection here of one of the lines on the road. I'm going to go ahead and make my selection around it, and then I'm going to use the content aware to get rid of that. 2 quick tips for making selections. Command Enter will make that selection. Shift Delete will bring you into the menu where you can use content aware. You can see the before and after that cleanup work here. Now I have these mountains that I would like to place in the background, so what I'm going to do is drop the opacity and kind of line up with the horizon. Create a layer mask and start painting away. It doesn't have to be perfect here since there's going to be fog anyway and it's supposed to look like it's covered in fog a little bit. One thing I forgot to do is clean up the background a little bit of the image, so we're going to use the same selection and content aware to clean up these background images. Going back to the mountains, I have my layer mask looking the way I want, so what I'm going to do is add a hue saturation adjustment layer to the entire image and drop down the saturation all the way so it's fully black and white. And then I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer that is clipping only to the mountains layer. If you hold Option, you'll see a little right arrow looking thing that'll allow you to do that. From here, I'm just going to start playing around with the curves adjustments, matching it as best as I can to the rest of the background, kind of dragging it up from the left side and keeping it more than less in the same place on the right side. Once I was happy with the brightness levels, I decided to play around with the color, so I dragged that existing hue saturation layer down and clipped it to the mountains. I dropped the saturation a little bit, increased the lightness a little bit while leaving the hue where it was at just because the tint looked pretty good. And we're actually going to group all these and drop down the opacity all the way to further give the illusion that there's a bunch of fog in the background. Next thing I'm going to do is create a new layer. Just name it fog, and then I'm going to drop the flow down on my brush to about 10% while keeping the opacity at 100. And then I'm just going to paint across the background after I sampled a color, just one of those white colors from the background. just to add more fog, give the image overall more atmosphere. The blending modes don't really matter too much on this, but I think I ended up using light and one of that nature. Doesn't really add too much, especially when you're using a color that's white. Now I wanted to do some dodge and burning, so I created another layer. Then if you click Shift Delete and fill it with a color, go to 50% gray, which is also 80, 80, 80. Then change the blend mode of that to overlay. And then from here, you can use the dodge and burn tools to brighten and darken any part of the image you want. Check out that before and after. It really adds so much depth to the image and makes everything look so much better. But also keep in mind that the car isn't the only thing that can be dodged and burned. But before we get to that, I want to do one thing here real quick. I was going to just burn the windshield, but I decided to actually make a selection here. And then once I have my selection, I am going to make a brightness adjustment layer, clip it only to the windshield, and then just decrease the brightness to make it look a little more tinted. Going back to what I said about the car isn't the only thing that you can dodge and burn, I'm actually going to burn these mountains a little bit in the background to give those peaks a little bit of a darker look, make it look like they're peeking through make the peaks look like they're peeking through the clouds a little bit. I also did a little burning around the edge of the image, kind of give it a little more vignetting if you would. And once again, instead of burning these hood vents, I decided to just make a selection and then change the brightness level of it, drop it down. Now, after you make a selection around one layer, don't go ahead and make that selection. Go ahead and drag your pinpoints around the other one, and then once you got there, go ahead and click Command-Enter and Command-J to create those so they're both on one single layer. However, if you did manage to do them separately, if you select both of them and click Command-E, it will merge the two layers together. Either that, or you could also make a smart object or group them and attach the brightness adjustment layer to them that way. There's so many different ways to do stuff in Photoshop. Here's the Lightroom only image, and here's what the image looks like in Photoshop. Let's do a quick recap on what we've done. We edited the image in Lightroom, of course. We got rid of a lot of those reflections in the car and some of those in the background as well. We added the mountains to the background, added the fog, changed the hood vents, the windshield, and we dodged and burned the entire image. And the image is looking pretty good the way it is right now, but there's one more thing I want to do. I'm going to go ahead and make a selection around those turn signals right there, go into the layer style, select my color overlay, change the blend mode color dodge, and from here I'm going to choose kind of like an orangish color, a little bit brighter to give you the illusion that the turn signals are on. And now we are done. Let's go ahead and take a look at that before and after. If you like that video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe, go follow me on Instagram @Zach_Hitzman. And until next time, peace.